Jamaica became a British colony in 1655, didn't it? It was taken from the Spanish, who'd already established a small trade in African slaves. And we do have some data from 1611, which shows that there were 558 African slaves and around 1,300 Spaniards at that time. But within 50 years of colonisation, so there's colonisation, Britain had established sugar estates and they were importing more slaves from West Africa, so the number had gone up to 45,000. And then by the time Britain abolished slavery in 1834, Jamaica had a population of more than 311,000 slaves compared to 16,700 Europeans. So Esther, is it possible to work out the extent to which Jamaica economically benefited from the free slave workers?
Well, yes, what we know is that Jamaica, as the largest colony and where the largest amount of Africans were trafficked, then it meant that Britain, in particular the British colonial government, benefited the most. And what we know, there's about 42% of the industry was generated due to trafficking of African labour, forced labour on plantations in Jamaica. So today we can sort of work out the equivalent of how much Britain actually benefited.
So you can put a figure on it, can you?
Well, the figures are being developed, but the starting point is not really looking at the figures in terms of monetary amounts. It's really recognising this history and the huge depths of this history and the legacies of this history for Jamaicans today. And the fact that the sugar industry is still one of the largest industries in Jamaica. So in effect, you still have a plantation-based economy.
Well, let's drill into some of those figures a little bit more, because we can look at how much Britain did profit. The wealth created in Jamaica by the labour of black slaves has been estimated at around £18 million, more than half of the estimated total for the entire British West Indies. And we're talking about the sugar trade mostly, aren't we?
Well, yes, and you know, it's interesting, this language of trade, because trade is how the colonisers saw it. It's not how the enslaved saw it. And for the enslaved, it was forced labour, it was trafficking, it was a genocide. And we know that even to produce sugar, the life expectancy for people working on these plantations was in between 7 and 9 years. This was hard, back-breaking labour, and it was a form of early terrorism, transnational terrorism.
Okay, well, let's take a look at how extensive Britain's role in slave trading was. It's hard to be sure on exact numbers, but estimates are that British ships took around 1 million people to Jamaica and 3.4 million across the Americas, although many believe the number is much greater than that. The only country to carry more people over the duration of the slaving period was Portugal. So how extensive was Britain's slaving compared to other countries?
It began to dominate the enslavement of African people. I mean, a lot of focus is put on abolition in 1807, abolition of the Slave Trade Act, and then the Abolition of Slavery Act in 1833. We don't focus on that period of the British government's involvement from 1563, when Queen Elizabeth I was on the throne and actually bankrolled this. And so we're looking at a huge period. And we see the development of ports in Britain, Liverpool, Bristol first, Liverpool, and then London, and the huge amount of economic benefits that came to this country.
Okay, let's take a look at if Britain were to pay reparations, and we should say that they're not saying that they would, how many countries could have a claim? Well, this map is by no means exhaustive, but in the red are the main countries where Britain captured or bought people to sell into slavery, and in blue are the main countries where slaves were transported by British ships. You can see an awful lot of them there in the Caribbean, very small there to pick out. But in fact, the whole area was probably affected.
The whole area. And in fact, what we are saying is it's not just a claim of these countries, it's a claim of the peoples in these countries. We know that on abolition of slavery in 1833, those who were enslavers got compensated to the tune of 20 million at the time, which in today's figures, conservatively, is 17 billion. So the enslavers got compensated for the loss of their property. The enslaved got nothing, and in fact were forced to pay for their own so-called emancipation to the tune of another £27 million, which was paid for by a period of 4 to 6 years apprenticeship. And so the legacy continues.
Esther Stanford Jose, very interesting to talk to you. Thanks very much indeed. Well, let's discuss this a little bit further, because joining us now via Skype from Kingston in Jamaica is Vereen Shepherd, chair of the